Welcome to the Dev Ready podcast, where we're helping non-techs build better tech. Today, we're joined by Mark Hovey. He is the founder, owner of Bioingenuity, a consulting business in the area of medtech, and also been a part of a number of medtech startups. And I wanted to bring Mark on today just to talk a little bit about his journey in the world of startup, especially in the medtech space, and some of the learnings he's had through that journey. Mark, thank you for joining us.
Well, thanks very much, Andrew, for having me on the show, and Anthony as well. It's a pleasure to be here.
Welcome aboard.
Welcome aboard. And he would sound like he's from the other side of the world, but Mark is now living in sunny Brizzy. I think you met your wife and moved down here, from what I recall from the last chat.
I did, yeah. So I'm originally actually from outside of Boston, and I've been in Brisbane off and on since 2015, and got charmed by a Brisbaneite. So now I've been living here for the past couple of years.
Brilliant. Mark, tell the audience a little bit about your background and history, especially in the space of how it's led to where you are today.
Sure. So I've actually spent my entire career in the medical device sector, the bulk of my career in the medical device sector. Originally as a biomedical engineer, studying in New York State. I spent 3 years working in Silicon Valley with cardiovascular products. Actually started my career doing undergraduate research at the Cleveland Clinic for cardiovascular implanted products. I spent about 7 years in Boston preparing to pursue medicine as a career rather than business. But during that time, I worked as an engineer, project manager, pursued a number of different industry certifications, and did my pre-med requirements at Harvard Night School. And ultimately, I was actually able to get accepted into medical school in Brisbane at the University of Queensland as part of a hybrid program that I did 2 years in Brisbane, my preclinical years, and then I did my clinical rotations in New Orleans, Louisiana. So towards the end of my medical school journey, I actually decided to not pursue additional clinical training, and instead rolled up a lot of my experience into my own consulting business, which is what Bioingenuity is, a strategic healthcare and biotech consulting company. And since 2018, I have been doing really a number of different consulting projects with clients as large as Johnson & Johnson, but also as small as emerging med tech companies in the digital health space predominantly.
Interesting. What fascinating story around your background. What led you into that engineering product space? What did you find interesting about that? Obviously, there was some sort of draw to that area.
Yeah. So look, I think, as you get through your journey of science, you sort of make decisions about where you want to sit within the applied science spectrum. And I started off actually as a physics major and was about as far away from being applied as possible. I think that a lot of what I found, so I did undergraduate research in cardiovascular heart valves, and I was able to sort of parlay that into an industry job supporting pacemakers and defibrillators. And while supporting those products as an engineer in California, I was able to actually see the products implanted, participate in ICD or defibrillator implants throughout the US, and kind of fell in love with the practical side of engineering and product design and product implementation and sales. So I think that for me, it was a good mix of being able to use really sound fundamentals in a scientific discipline such as engineering, biomedical engineering, but then having that kind of translate into the real world and not get lost in pure research and so on, to actually feel the kind of tangible aspects of it. And so since that time, I think it's really rewarding, and I think it's all about kind of what drives you as an individual. But for me in particular, the ability to see the end effect of the work is really important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I totally get that. Anthony, probably in the same boat over there.
Yeah, it always helps when you can actually see the result of what you're trying to do. We write code, or they've been writing code for a long time, and you don't generally see what you create.
Yeah, I think it's important to get that feedback right away, and just to know what you're doing, that it exists in the real world. It's not just going to get lost on some shelf.
Yeah. Part of your journey, Mark, what's a standout project for you that you'd say you're probably the most passionate about when you were involved in it?
Yeah, listen, I've had a few. I think that the first startup that I was in since shortly after I started BioIngenuity was actually a medical imaging startup, and I
Okay.
consider that the most interesting 4-year-long conversation that I had. Ultimately, that startup was not successful, and there were plenty of lessons to learn from why it wasn't successful. But entering into the digital health market in 2018, and even now, digital health is so malleable. The field itself is literally changing month to month and quarter to
Mhm.
quarter. Um, so entering into that field with a number of highly accomplished healthcare professionals with different backgrounds and expertise, and then creating almost a think tank like environment of what could potentially be created by leveraging traditional technology but spinning it up within a more innovative application, and thinking about how we could potentially change the practice of medicine, the practice of healthcare, and just all the challenges that came with that. To me, it was probably the most engaging thing that I've done to really synthesize a lot of the knowledge
Mhm.
knowledge and experience, and to do that within a venture where you're a major stakeholder it's a really exciting initiative, and I think that that's part of what makes working in startups actually so appealing.
It is appealing because you're covering all bases. You're not just looking at a product design. You're looking at end to end, how you might impact the industry, the market, how you sell it, how you communicate it, how you deliver more value. There's quite a bit within the world of startup.
And
Yeah,
working with those stakeholders as well,
Mm.
where you could just be working with a lead of your team and no one else.
Mhm.
that's exactly right. So I think I've worked for some of the large. I've done 2 tours at Johnson and Johnson, and largest medical
Mhm.
products company in the world, and a number of other Fortune 500 companies that Um, in many cases, you're a cog within that machine, but you go to your job, you kind of learn the parameters of your job, and then you sort of put yourself. You're not fully engaged as much as I think you are in a small shop. And with a startup, there are so many problems that Anthony, like you're saying, directly can impact stakeholders or even customers, but also there's sort of day-to-day problems that you just have to get things done, and it's actually a really just exciting place to work all around.
Yeah, I think the ability to move quickly as well probably helps and adds to that excitement because it's not, it has to go up 3 levels of the food chain and get questions have to get asked, proposals have to get created. You can just make the decision and jump with it.
That's right. So I've lived the pain of having something that should take 5 minutes to be approved. Take 6 weeks of going around and around, and after a while, you lose your appetite for it. So working in a lean environment, sitting across the table, and being trusted to have the accountability and the ownership of your end of the business is it's a pretty good way to roll.
Do you mind if we dig into that a little bit, Mark? You mentioned obviously you were there for 4 years.
Yep.
You titled it as failed. What does that mean to you? So, what were some of the things that you started? What was the vision of the business as it started, and where did you end up 4 years down the track?
Sure. So the business was I came in not as a co-founder, but as an early team member.
Mm-hmm.
The business had been founded already a couple of years before I joined, with the vision of actually taking MRI technology and taking it from sort of a back end confirmatory test that you would use to diagnose problems, and to actually leverage some of the power of medical imaging to push it more into an upstream role where it could actually potentially have prognostic um, potential. So using MRI almost proactively. Now, there's a lot of traditional clinicians that will tell you a lot of reasons why you shouldn't do that, and that's fine. But I think part of what we were leveraging or trying to leverage was just the amount of data that's available in an MRI, and
Mm-hmm.
how much of that data is not currently leveraged within clinical practice. So I came in initially actually as a chief medical officer, and then early on felt that we needed to have some startup fundamentals and solidify just the corporatization of the business itself. So things that often kind of get a bad rep, but mission, vision, and values, just pulling the group together and really trying to figure out what are we trying to do with this initiative and this venture, and who are we. Um, creating the vision, the common vision of what the business was all about. Those are some early kind of lessons that we all built together. I ended up moving into the chief operating officer role for the business, and I actually liked that operational mindset. I'm a bit of a nuts and bolts guy, so I mentioned just the small problems that need to be solved, as well as the big macro problems of where the business is heading and monetization and profitability and so on. So, the at the end of the day, and there's a lot that can be pulled apart, but startup fundamentals, product market fit, what problem are you really trying to solve? Who is your customer? How are you serving your customer? How well does your product or service actually solve the problem that you're going after? How do you monetize that into a sustainable business model? Those are the types of things that any startup will encounter. I think in the digital health space, you have added complexity with how you interact with the existing healthcare system, certainly in the United States, but even globally. And then you also have additional complexity with data and validating product models. And so there's a lot of digital health companies that promise a lot of things, but when you pull the veneer of what they're saying back, they really don't have as much evidence as you might hope for. And so I think we kind of fell into that bucket and encountered some challenges.
Mm-hmm. Did you get to a point of being able to establish product, generate some value? Where did you get to in the line of your development of product?
Yeah, so we were cash flow positive. We were debt free. We had revenue between $250K and $1 million. We're still early on. We actually were avoiding actively and deliberately external financing, and so that's a whole other kind of separate strategy. And although most people think you need to raise capital, you don't necessarily need to. Though the jury's out whether it may have benefited us in the long run or not, to maybe give us a little more runway. So we had a functional business. We were able to actually secure some clients that weren't really serving at the core of what the vision of the business was, but was generating some cash flow to keep everybody at the table and engaged. Okay. We had some high-level discussions with New York State Department of Health and a lot of industry partners. Had quite a bit of visibility on actually creating our product and some of the direct-to-consumer reports that we were trying to create. And really we're trying to capture a large segment of the entire value stream. So again, in our case, we had to look at how to actually access MRI machines and then how to generate reports and how to have customers that would potentially offer those reports to their patients and so on. So it was a pretty complex approach, but ultimately we were able to sustain for a number of years. I think we were refining the product market fit, and I think ultimately what caused us to fail was not necessarily the technology, was not necessarily who we had in the room. I think it was just a matter of the dynamics of not having enough cash flow and kind of running out of puff. And so I think, there's volumes about why startups fail, and it's not because they run out of cash or time. It's just that, sometimes founders run out of energy. And I certainly think that we fell into that bucket.
It can be an all-consuming space to work in. Like you said, when you're digging in the world of startup, it becomes a 24/7 job. Even when you're sleeping, you're thinking about how you might solve X, Y, Z. So I understand the fact of, we can run out of puff. Completely agree with that. I think as you've been in the world of a business startup, you go through different moments of energy where sometimes you're on a really good win, and then other times you just probably need a bit of a break and unwind. The only challenge in startup, if you're cash flow poor, chasing your tail 24/7, and you run out of puff at the wrong time, that's where maybe a little bit extra runway funding or time to move on may come into it.
Couldn't agree more with that. And I think the question is, how long do you want to bootstrap as a startup? And so there's always value to trying to build your business, I think, as much as you can on your own before
Mhm.
accepting external help. But then there does
Yes.
come that point where you're really just working, you're expelling energy that you don't need to, and the business needs to move on to the next phase of
Mhm.
growth. Otherwise, it starts to kind of contract. And
Mm.
I do agree with you. I think if you're, if you're an obsessive person or you're passionate about what you're doing, that 24/7, being consumed by the business, it's part of what makes it, unlike any other experience. But you're right. There's certainly a detrimental piece to it after a while if you're not moving in the right direction.
I think you need that momentum and you need that continuous something, what it may be growth, whether it be additional value from customers you're adding, whether it be finding new opportunities that you can build your product on and you open up more markets. I think in the end, it can be a bit of a momentum train. I don't know if you follow a bit of sport, but as you get a bit of momentum in any sport, it can kick along pretty quickly. When momentum stops and it's on the other side of the fence, it can be a little bit difficult to pick up at times. So, like anything, it can be a bit of a momentum game as well.
You need to see some of those outcomes and
Mm.
what you're working towards. If you lose that, then you're going to lose
Yes.
the motivation, not just the momentum.
Mm.
That's right. And that goes back to what we were saying before about having, practical goals and seeing the value of your work. And yeah, if you're constantly, butting your head against the wall, eventually that gets old. And the startup experience is a roller coaster, right? You have these wins that are amazing. You think that the margin between being wildly successful and failing is so thin that you think that there were moments where we had active purchase orders that I was actively preparing to have a brand new lifestyle overnight, and then the same week I was wondering how we're going to keep the lights on. So that the extremes of higher highs and lower lows are there. And from my perspective, coming from an endeavor like medicine, which is also it's all consuming in a physical way as well. But at pursuing medical training, to some extent, it's a little bit of a safer bet, right? If you just keep putting in the work, eventually you will turn into an attending physician, and you probably have a pretty good job on the other end that pays well and so on. So it's almost a secure pursuit. Myself, I'm a bit of a risk junkie, and I like to kind of get to the
area generally is. Yes.
Yeah, I think just kind of letting it ride and I've always taken risks, even in my personal life, and I think that's for me why innovation is the way to stay.
Anyone that's sort of entertaining or in the world of medical, there's really different challenges beyond just building technology, right? Getting access to the data that you're trying to get access to, storage of the data, a lot more complexities around legislation, around how this all comes together. Do you run into any roadblocks in terms of what you're doing from that perspective as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot there. There's governance, and governance of data can change certainly does change from country to country. It can change from state to state, and as it does in Australia. If you actually secure and obtain data and then need to migrate it into a different jurisdiction, you have to be very mindful of that. There's privacy and security, patient consent. Ultimately, patients own their data, and as they rightfully should. And then working with the clinical community. It's really, again, within healthcare, within digital health, particularly in digital health, there's so much hype now and there's so little that's actually solidified about it that unless you're demonstrating real world clinical value, you're actually moving the needle on outcomes for your patients, or you're moving the financial needle for systems where it just makes sense for them. They can't look away from what you're doing. It's a bit of a challenge to try to corral folks to see the value in what you're doing. And data is ultimately the currency that you operate in. And if you don't have data, you're not going to go very far. And if you do have data, but that data is not validated, meaning made extremely robust and prove out your theories and so on, and tested. Again, you're gonna have a hard time making a compelling case that your solution is better than the existing status quo or other solutions out there.
You can't just say you're better. You have to actually prove it in this sense, as opposed to just marketing talk.
That's right. And there's certainly regulations that are there in place to protect patients and protect consumers, and we all need those, right? You don't want
correct.
to take an ibuprofen that hasn't been vetted thoroughly by evidence. But even in exploring direct to consumer models, it's not like you're building a SaaS app on your phone and you can just push something out in the market and let your customers sort of determine how your product development goes. It's actually the opposite. You almost need to have a lot up front that demonstrates your value before you even consider pushing it out in the market.
And that makes obviously the whole proposition a lot more risky, right? The advantage of being in a model where you have less legislation, risk, governance components, you can push out a little MVP, get feedback, iterate. In the world of the type of data you're playing in, you need that security overlay, you need all these different metrics that you may not need in a little startup space that's consumer focused. So that probably puts a few levels of challenges in front of you as you go into this pursuit.
It does make it safer for the consumer, though. They know they're not going to be scammed or ripped off. The product will deliver what it should be delivering,
with that,
as opposed to the 3,000 CRMs that all do the same thing, but none might do anything.
Yes.
That's exactly right. I think the challenge is if you're on the business ownership side of things, move fast and break things doesn't really work in healthcare, and it shouldn't necessarily work. And so, there's a lot more, meticulous and deliberate nature of what you're designing to get there. And just from a speed of growth perspective, it can certainly slow down your growth. So you may want to get to another phase of growth, but you haven't solved fundamental, challenges to the business.
Okay. In terms of the business itself, when did you move on? Was it a few years ago now, was it, roughly?
This was, I don't even know what year we're in. Actually, it was technically, I think, officially earlier this year, at the beginning of the year.
Yeah.
And so we had kind of, how a startup fails. I'm sure you could have a whole segment on that. Some people just cut the head off and that's it. Some people kind of do the death roll for a few months and you hope that you can resurrect it. So we kept fighting to the end to kind of explore new models, but ultimately I don't think that it's part of it. Actually, on my end is that I now have an 18-month-old daughter, so I just ran out of patience. I could still be fighting. I loved working with the crew that I was working with, and would love to kind of actually keep working with them, but I can't justify the hours and the time anymore if I don't see frankly the financial and also just the end effect in the world. So my appetite for not risk, but my appetite for the sweat equity went down quite a bit, and so I've switched into kind of a new venture, more in robotics, actually, that I think has a good chance of going somewhere.
In terms of the end of that startup, is that completely shut down, wound down, or is it sort of in ghost mode where it's some things happening, but there's people hopeful it may come back?
I think it's probably a little bit of the latter. I mean, you never know where these things are going to go and how the markets will shift as well. So if I got a call tomorrow, I mean, who knows? I would entertain it, but it's because I believed in what we were doing, and I still think that there's opportunities to actually move the needle in healthcare and change things for the better. But it's more finding its legs, and I think most of the founders have kind of moved. The two founders have moved on, and I think some of the team has kind of moved on to other ventures.
Yeah, so the likelihood of it picking up again is going to be very minimal, but
very minimal.
It's not a fun thing, but it's also what did it teach you? So, what are some of the things you learned through that experience?
Certainly, the amount of time I put in to that company and to not have it go to where I knew it had the potential to go, it's something that, to be honest with you, I still struggle with. It was a 4-year window of my life. Particularly leaving clinical training and throwing myself fully into a business that failed, I think was, it's something that I think, okay, well, could I have used that time differently? What I did get from that 4 years is a tremendous amount of knowledge and management skill and stakeholder engagement and just wisdom. And so I would not change that for anything. And I actually think that I learned more in those 4 years than I think I might have even if I went to residency. And there's probably any physicians listening would probably be shaking their head right now. But I think that it taught me a lot of practical lessons in what not to do in a business, how to conduct things differently. It taught me how to handle failure, outright failure of a business. It taught me what to look out for in a future business partner that I look out or would potentially work with, and also taught me that I would do it again for the right set of ingredients. And I think that it's definitely a space that I'm interested in continuing to explore. So yeah, I'm still processing it, believe it or not, and I think that I probably will for years to come.
Oh, we do. I think it's about, but also looking forward too, right? We can live in the past. That is done, but yeah, I think some of the things you can take from it are the experience that you've learnt through it. You mentioned a couple of things around what to look for in a partner. If you were to pick a business partner again, or some partners again, what sort of qualities would you entertain jumping on the bandwagon again and going down that startup train with?
Somebody who's failed in a startup, I think, is actually high in that list, right? I think you've learned on your own skin what not to do, and I think that's the reason why the most successful entrepreneurs are older and they're in their 40s and beyond. So that's actually something I have considered. Serial entrepreneurship, failure as a model for success. I mean, I think that's definitely part of the journey. But, other than that, sound fundamentals, understanding of the vision, full commitment to the vision of what you're trying to do, practical skills of how to actually implement and achieve the vision, being well connected, I think is important, well networked within your particular vertical. The ability to procure funds is certainly important. Just where you sit within your philosophy of how and when to raise capital, or whether you want to at all. So yeah, I think it's kind of a mix of experience and then just vision and practical skills. And I, in my current venture, again, I'm acting as COO in a robotics company and working with a seasoned plastic surgeon, 20-year plastic surgeon, and he's got all the right mix of what I'm looking for in a business partner at the moment.
Oh, brilliant. If you were to start that business again 4 years ago, what did you bring to the table now?
Now I think I would ask a lot more questions up front rather than, take 6 months to learn why I should be asking that question. And I would probably do a very deep dissection of what was really trying to be achieved. And it comes down to those fundamental questions of what problem are you trying to solve? What value are you adding? And who's going to pay for what you're doing?
Yeah, it sounds very textbook, but it's in the end, that's the reality of business, right? We have to be able to
textbook because it applies to everyone.
It does, yeah, but it's just the same thing everyone repeats, and I think people need to listen. From a value proposition perspective, it's important to provide value, yes, but how much value are you actually providing? There's an episode with actually a guy out of Brisbane. His name's Philip Knoll. May have trotted across him before in the past, but he told the story on a podcast about a year ago, and he was talking about yes, there might be a problem that you want to solve. An example of a problem could be toothpaste. He referred to, which I never forget this story. Everyone has the problem of can't get the end of the toothpaste out of the tooth tube. There's always a little bit left. But is that a big enough problem to solve, and how much value you're adding by solving that problem? And sometimes, yes, we might perceive that we're going to add value, but is it a big enough problem to solve, or is there enough value that people are going to pay for it? So we do need to consider that on the scale of that level, really, as well.
You do, and the flip side of that is try to change every tube, boil the ocean, and try to change every tube of toothpaste out on the market, and that's another strategy that may not work. So I agree, finding that balance is important, and I think they're fundamental statements, but I think until you live them, and unfortunately you live the failure on your own skin, then you sort of say, oh, that's why that's important, and maybe I should have paid more attention to that at the beginning.
Yeah. So moving a bit forward, what's exciting you about the robotics business that you're in right now?
Sure. So first off, just the vector and trajectory of robotics within robotic assisted surgery, telerobotics, COVID has certainly accelerated, you know, both of those domains. I think that they're certainly going to be in the future. So I think that playing in the space of a market that is only growing it makes things a lot easier. Um, there's some fundamental questions and fundamental problems with robotic assisted surgery that I don't think are being addressed in the marketplace right now. So I think that there's a real opportunity for the patented technology that we're working with to potentially slide in and just make a lot of sense for surgeons across the globe. Again, I mentioned my business partner. He's a seasoned, highly educated, highly experienced plastic surgeon, and he actually created the technology after dealing with the problem for 20 years. And so he actually did something about it, went out and invented a technical solution, got a patent on it. We have another patent that's pending. So from an IP perspective, it's an interesting portfolio to be involved in. And that type of story. I mean, I haven't talked at all about the story of why you start a business, and to some extent, I'm a little cynical about like how much a founder's story matters with funding a business, but I get it, and I get the importance of it. But from an involvement and time perspective, to be involved with somebody that's as knowledgeable and experienced as my business partner, and to know that he actually lived the problem long enough to solve it, to me tells me it's a real problem, first of all, and that I think he's done a good job of figuring out how to solve the problem. So my role is to kind of help him commercialize the IP that he's created. We're kind of actively looking to partner in co-development or licensing engagements. And so there's a lot of fun reaching out to businesses and trying to figure out how to get the business up on its feet. So there's a lot of meat on the bone, and it's enough to kind of soften the blow a little bit coming off of a heavy loss.
It's a different starting point and makes it probably a bit more exciting as well.
Yeah, I think that the first, the imaging business, similarly, it was a good starting point to be in, because it was interesting for the reasons of having that 4-year-long conversation, but to have things a little bit more robust and kind of gelled together, and to now have it more, let's take this to the last line here and find somebody that's really going to get behind this product and push it into the real world. And I mean, there's always, there's financial goals, of course, to all the businesses, but at the end of the day, that's not what drives you, right? It's knowing that you are getting behind something that's impacting the world, and that you believe in actually seeing it enter into the world and kind of affect change. So to me, I would love to see our product on robotic surgery platforms in the future, and maybe even become standard of care. And I think that we have actually a pretty good shot at that happening.
Yeah, it is. I think it's, when people look at it, if you're just financially driven by a business, that's the easiest way to actually fail, because it's never going to be easy in business. You need to have a bit more behind you to actually understand, all right, why are you doing this? What's the value you think you're bringing to the table? And the end outcome, if it's just financial, it can be a little bit hard to stick that journey if you're going through the ebbs and flows of what businesses look like, that roller coaster ride. So agree that you need to stand in a place where you're actually feeling what the benefit could be, seeing it, envisaging it, and striving for the benefit rather than the financial outcomes, because they will come if you deliver the value they perceive throughout the business that you set up. So exciting times. Yeah, that seems pretty new, pretty raw. What's the plans for the next 6 to 12 months in that business?
Well, so we actually just started in 2021. Officially, the company started. It's called Plasbotics. Just started in 2021. We've applied for some non-dilutive funding. So going back to what I said before, establishing funding early was actually one of my key priorities, so that we didn't run into issues. Ideally, we will receive some funding. Actually, literally any day could hear whether that's the case. But the plan is we have a functional prototype. The plan is actually to get it into preclinical testing on porcine models, pig models. And we have a business partner to do that with, and eventually to actually get the product tested in humans, and then to start trying to form those strategic partnerships. We do actually already have some discussions with the large Japanese manufacturer that we're exploring. So I think, from my perspective, it's building, again, putting as much value into the business as possible, and then seeking partners that can really carry it to the next level of growth. And I would love to see in the next 6 to 12 months the product being tested first in animal studies and then making its way into human studies.
Oh, brilliant.
Which is a part of the normal life cycle of med devices.
It's very different to any other SaaS product, like you said
It
earlier.
is, yeah. You don't just throw it up on the web and buy.
Look, I mean, yes. Well, I was just going to say some of that's a well-trodden path for medical devices. The other thing about this particular venture is that it goes more to my fundamentals as a medical device professional, and so I think that I can I'm a little bit more in my own natural wheelhouse. But yeah, I think as you start to commercialize an actual medical product, it's a very long process, and it's long for a reason. But there are necessary stops along the way in testing the product in animals, and then progressively introducing more risk and making sure that the benefits outweigh the risks as you move towards humans, and eventually you get regulatory approvals and it can make its way into the market.
How long might it take in reality? Starting point 2021 being actually used on human surgeries. How long are you expecting?
Some devices can take 6 to 10 years.
Wow.
I mean, to actually make their way, and that's a refined product to kind of be used in humans. That's on the consumer end. Some products can certainly be accelerated. It depends on what the product is doing and how much risks it introduces to the patient.
Okay.
So there are different classifications of regulation. Riskier products obviously take longer to be fully vetted. And part of that, again, is you need time and data to demonstrate, okay, this is a safe product. It's been de-risked. So a lot of it's by design, but yeah, it's not a fast process. And I many times think I should have gone into like a direct to consumer, software application or SaaS product that can be spun up in 6 months and pushed out, and then, let the market take it from there. Very different business model altogether.
Completely. But I think the one advantage of being in that space is it takes you 6 to 10 years to get the product into market. If it's patented and actually is adding value, you set a nice little moat up for yourself as a business as well. In the world of SaaS, anyone can copy paste some features and functions and can look alike for like pretty quickly. So there is the added value of that heavy investment in early stages, but you're going to need a clear funding pathway as well. You can't just bootstrap that. I don't imagine you could, but how do you sort of set up the funding pathway with good partners in that model?
If you're hitting those goals along the way and you're progressively clearing every check and balance that you need to, your confidence will go up on the business and how successful it's going to be as well. So
and that will convey to investors as well. So certainly if you reach certain milestones, that's exactly right. That if you demonstrate that the product actually works, that it's safe, you're going to have an easier time raising capital. You're right though that the first mover advantage or first to market advantage, you can make a great product in the consumer space, and then you can have one feature that doesn't quite work right, and that's enough of an angle for competitors to come in and say, I'm going to basically replicate what you've done, but do that one feature better. And you almost disrupt yourself because you didn't develop it properly. So it's a little bit different in med device. The difference is also though that there are incumbent large corporations that it's two-sided. You can move faster as a startup, but you also can't compete with the economies of scale of those large businesses and the sales distribution and just the manpower. So those companies that all have their own version of skunkworks can quickly spin up something similar but different enough. And interestingly, I've been in meetings at notable companies that have they will take materials, for instance, and they'll hire chemical engineers to reverse engineer the molecular structure of materials, but make it just different enough that it can go around a patent. So there's all kinds of clever ways to kind of design products and get around the market. But that's part of what makes it fun as well.
And they've got the money to do that as well.
They do. Yeah. And it's in their interest to enter into certain markets that you've now opened up if you were first to the market.
If anyone is out there listening that's is maybe medical by background, wants to head into this space, or has concepts, ideas, where do they start? What's the first point of call for them generally?
Well, certainly here's a shameless plug. I mean, I'm always open to connect with medical founders that are interested in innovation. My website is www.bioenginuity.com, and my email is solutions@bioenginuity.com. Look, there are a number of different consultants like myself that work across the healthcare spectrum, working with subject matter experts, working with business folks, and so on. There's also innovation groups. I'm actually the Brisbane chapter leader of the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs. So there's a SOAP chapter in many cities in the United States and around the globe. And so that's a way to actually connect within your own local ecosystem with other like-minded healthcare innovators. So I think that getting involved and networking and reaching out to folks that can potentially connect you in is always worthwhile. And I have many interesting conversations each week with clinicians similar to my current business partner that have endured problems, and they're trying to solve them to make healthcare better.
Oh, brilliant, Mark. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for coming on the Dev Ready podcast. Really appreciate the time. And let's check in 6 to 12 months. I'd love to hear how the robotic project is kicking along, and all fingers crossed that it goes in a direction that you're interested in. But it sounds like it's is it software based or is it hardware based?
It's a hardware base.
Yeah.
It's a surgical instrument, but we are exploring the user side of it, the user console and software based, and even data analytics and intelligence.
Yeah, so there's a bit of complexity throughout that whole piece, I would imagine. Yeah, good luck with it all.
That's right.
Thanks for sharing the wins and the failures, because I think there's plenty of benefit for people listening in to understand what might not have got right. Some of the key things that I sort of took away from this is it seemed like the business that you were in 4 years ago was coming at it from an angle of there might be something we could do, rather than having a core problem to solve already. So it was more of that some design thinking sort of starting point. That's what it felt like when you described it. And then it sort of seems like it trailed down the fact of maybe generating revenue in an area that wasn't really focused or product focused. It was more maybe some consultative revenue. That's how I sort of grasped it. In the end, it's a good place to start, but yeah. And the other thing was bootstrapping. It was bootstrapped forever, and that was maybe the founder's decision to want to hold on to equity or just wanted ownership or controlling interest. I'm not quite sure, but I think we've got to be more open. It's what I've realized is some people that really succeed well, they partner. They're willing to bring other people onto the journey, whether it be investors, industry partners, whatever it might be, because in the end, if you want to make a big difference, you can't do it alone. And I think there's plenty in that today. So thank you for sharing. Really appreciate your time, Mark.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Anthony, Andrew, real pleasure to be here and happy to check back in and again, to connect with any of your listeners. So I appreciate the time.
Thank you, Mark. Check in every couple of years too.
All right, that works.
Your timeline.
I'll see you in 10 years.
Yeah. All right, thank you.
Excellent.
All right. Thanks very much.